Today, I'm reacting to Jeff Nippard's upper body workout he followed for 1 year to transform his physique. I'll break down exactly how effective this workout really is for building muscle, so you know how to train your upper body to maximize your physique development. Jeff and I have collaborated in the past and we're on good terms, so anything I say in this video is purely for educational purposes.
This is the upper body workout that I used for the last 365 days, and it transformed my physique. It took my back from looking like this to this, and my chest and shoulders from looking like this to this. And even after 15...
Real quick, that back shot comparison does look like it has distinctly different lighting. Specifically the contrast, or the direction of the lighting, seems quite different in the after shot versus the before shot. But putting that little bit of YouTube magic aside, let's focus on the workout.
After 15 years of natural training, I still managed to gain 2.7 pounds of lean mass, measured by DEXA, and I even added some extra peak to my biceps, measured by ultrasound. In this video, I'll show you the exact exercises and technique cues that made the biggest difference for me this year. Let's get into it. I think this was, hands down, the most effective exercise for growing my pecs this year, the Incline barbell bench press. It mostly targets the chest and front delts, with some bonus triceps, and even side delt activation, since the side delts help stabilize the bar from drifting forward or backward. I picked the Incline barbell press over the Incline dumbbell press because of the barbell's overload potential. I ran this program for a full year, and while dumbbells are great, once you get pretty strong, they become big, bulky, and awkward. But you can always add a little weight to the barbell. And while I am a fan of the Smith machine, I went with free weights here to get more out of the stabilizing muscles, especially those side delts. There's a growing trend of only doing the most stable, machine-based version of lifts, but I think that's gone a bit too far. Even for pure hypertrophy, free weight compound lifts still have a lot of value. And research backs this up. An incline barbell bench press clearly grows your chest. In fact, a 45-degree incline press will hit your upper pecs harder while still hitting your mid and lower pecs just as hard as a flat bench. The study from Chavez and colleagues found that the incline press grew the mid and lower pecs just as well as a flat bench, but the incline press had that added bonus of growing the upper pecs more. The incline press is also very time efficient because it kills two birds with one stone. You really don't need both a flat press and a vertical press if you just meet in the middle with a 45-degree incline. Now, the main technique cue that I focused on this year...
Broadly speaking, I think Jeff's on the money here. I think incline pressing, you'll notice in the study he mentioned, which I've discussed numerous times before, all differences in terms of pec hypertrophy measurements were in favor of incline pressing, suggesting as a one-stop shop, the incline press is a really solid exercise over even, potentially, a flat press variation. We definitely need more studies on the topic before we can say that for sure, but based on the research so far, it's looking promising. I think the barbell press is a fine exercise. Do I think it will lead to more overall hypertrophy in some of the stabilizing muscle groups? Not really. Not a lot anyways, because I don't think the side delts or many other muscles are being trained close enough to failure for it to really matter. So I don't personally see an incline Smith machine press as being worse than a free weight barbell press on account of hitting the stabilizers less. Because chances are those muscles aren't really growing much from this regardless, because pushing those close to failure matters. I do think that both the incline Smith machine press and the incline dumbbell press tend to be better options than the barbell version. Although yes, you need to kick the dumbbells back into position for an incline dumbbell press, it is a fair bit more time efficient on account of not needing to load up the barbell and unload it afterwards and setting up the rack and setting up the safeties on the rack and etc, etc, etc. You do tend to get a bit more stretch if you angle the dumbbells especially upwards, pushing your thumbs up towards the ceiling. You can get a deeper stretch. For people with joint discomfort, it can be easier to modify in order to still get a good range of motion in but make it more comfortable on your shoulders, say, because you're not fixed to a barbell position. You can safely hit failure with dumbbells and just kind of drop the dumbbells. And with a Smith machine, you get many of the same benefits of an incline barbell press, minus some of the eccentric loading, but you get the benefit of being able to push to failure safely, past failure doing partials, and re-rack at any point. You can also more easily get the best of both worlds during an incline press. Because the bar only moves straight up and down, you can develop the narrow grip for extra tricep range of motion and stretch at the bottom, while touching high on your chest and getting a deep pec stretch at the bottom. So you can touch high up on your chest, get a narrower grip, get more tricep stretch, and keep the bar path feeling relatively natural. Trying to do the same with an incline barbell press just makes the movement awkward. So if I had to say, I do think the incline dumbbell press is your best option, the incline Smith machine press is the second best. It also requires less setup than a barbell press, and the barbell press is a solid option but has some more limitations, especially for most people who have some sort of time constraint on their workouts. If you want to level up your training, check out MyoAdapt, the app I co-founded to help you apply the science from this channel. It builds evidence-based routines around progressive overload and smart exercise selection, lets you emphasize the muscles you care about, and tracks progress automatically. Train anywhere, at home or in a gym, in as little as 15 minutes and switch between gyms seamlessly. Head to MyoAdapt.com and use code WOLF for a free 2-week trial. You can also book a free call below to see if we're a good fit. I'll work with you directly to optimize your training, nutrition, and recovery. Big thank you as always to Rascal Apparel for supporting the channel. You can use code WOLF for 10% off their training gear at rascalapparel.com.
On this year was using a slightly narrower grip to increase the range of motion, and that'll hit a bit more triceps without losing chest tension. And of course, I took the last set to absolute failure every time. I never use a spotter to help me get the weight up. I wanted to give it my all this year and then just fail on my own accord for scientific consistency. Failing on a heavy compound lift can be a bit intimidating at first, even for experienced lifters, but there's really nothing to be scared of. Just press until you can't press anymore, and then dump the weight forward onto the safety bars. Now, the most common mistake I see...
Yep, I love that he's mentioning that failure on the compound movement, even bench pressing, even squatting, and even deadlifting, like RDLs, is fine. Just go to technical failure. If you can't get another rep with good technique, end the set. But truly pushing it to failure will get you more stimulus per set. And especially if you're someone who's short on time, who can't spend hours and hours in the gym every single week, making the most of each set makes a ton of sense. It takes you no additional time to go to failure or even past failure, and it will increase stimulus for hypertrophy.
Now, the most common mistake I see here is bouncing the bar off your chest. Yes, you can lift more weight this way, but remember, progressive overload is when you add a little weight or a rep from week to week, and that only counts if your technique stays consistent. So control the descent, do a slight pause on your chest, and then press the weight up and slightly back. Okay, next is where I slow things down a little bit more and put all the tension exactly where I want it, on the pecs. The seated cable fly will also stretch the pecs more than the heavy compound press that we did first. For these, set a bench pretty far out in front, grab both handles, hold them tight to your chest, and walk out in front of the bench. As you sit down, you don't want to get pulled backward, so ease yourself into the seat. Then press the handles forward into the starting position, and from there, begin your first rep with a nice and controlled negative. Try to get as deep as your shoulders will comfortably allow, and then squeeze the weight forward using your pecs. Try to focus on bringing your elbows together, not just your hands. This will keep tension on your chest and prevent your triceps and front delts from taking over. From there, sweep the weight out and back in an arc, not just back. So try to think about covering as much space as possible as you do the negative.
Yep, this is a solid exercise. What Jeff hasn't mentioned here just yet is that the way he set up the cables actually does increase resistance in the stretch a bit more and decrease it a bit more in the shortened position, which is likely a good thing for hypertrophy, as we have several dozens of studies on the stretch looking at a more stretched form of training versus a less stretched form of training, generally finding more growth with a more stretched form of training. I know people will have seen the recent study by Jones and colleagues that Jeremy Ethier funded looking at the effects of resistance profile on hypertrophy in the chest, delts, and glutes. And yes, in this study, putting more tension in the stretch didn't benefit growth of the pecs. But if you zoom out and look at all of the research on the effects of resistance profile on hypertrophy, you do generally see that putting more tension in the stretch, likely even for the pecs, is going to boost growth. If you want an alternative exercise to what Jeff is doing here, the dumbbell fly is great at this. And it's my personal favorite chest isolation movement. I also love that Jeff is emphasizing here to not just extend your elbows and flex them on the way down and turn it into a pressing variation essentially, but rather to keep a fixed elbow angle and to move your elbows, not your wrists.
Now, I picked these over a pec deck because I do find I can get a bit deeper here than most pec decks allow. And I do them seated over standing because if you're seated, you'll be a bit more stable, which means no tension coming from the weight stack is being lost to my ankles or my low back, which will have to do some stabilization when I'm standing. Remember, our goal here is pure pectoral isolation. Now, the most common mistake I see here is letting your elbows drop. This puts your pecs at a mechanical disadvantage and worsens the line of pull for the pec fibers. So keep your elbows up and think about hugging a big tree as you fly forward. Then sweep the weight out in a wide arc on the negative. And again, last set to failure, no exceptions.
I think Jeff sometimes recommends tucking your elbows a bit more on bench press variations to align better with the fibers of the pecs, but here he's recommending flaring your elbows more for flies to align better to put them in a stronger position. But I'm curious as to what the reasoning here is, why the discrepancy exists.
Gains I made this year were in my back, and I owe a lot of that to one exercise, weighted pull-ups. I know I infamously put these in A tier instead of S tier last year, but after this 365-day experiment, I'm officially promoting pull-ups to S tier. Pull-ups light up your entire back. Your lats handle the shoulder extension, your mid-traps and rhomboids will light up during scapular retraction, and your low back will engage for stabilization.
Okay. I think this is probably a bit of an overstatement. One, during the pull-up, your upper back musculature, your middle traps, your lower traps, and your rhomboids never get into full stretch. Now yes, Jeff just mentioned that your scapula do get slightly retracted at the top of the rep, but they never fully get protracted. You only get that during rows. And because getting a deep stretch in a muscle is pretty important for hypertrophy, chances are pull-ups just aren't anywhere close to ideal for hypertrophy of the upper back like the mid-traps, lower traps, and rhomboids. Additionally, biomechanically, those muscles likely aren't being taken that close to failure. Instead, it's much more likely the lats are, since the primary function occurring during a pull-up is shoulder extension or shoulder reduction depending on biomechanics. And finally, the lower back? Not really. If anything, a pull-up typically forces your spine into more extension, meaning your abs have to spinally flex to remain more neutral. So in my opinion, if anything, the pull-ups don't train the lower back or the upper spinning at all. I sometimes get slightly sore abs from doing pull-ups, if I haven't done them in a long time. So I don't really think pull-ups train your whole back very effectively, no. I think they're good for your lats and for your teres major, and even for your biceps, but when it comes to the rhomboids, the mid-traps, the lower traps, and the erectors especially, I disagree with Jeff here. And I also don't think weighted pull-ups are necessarily S-tier. And that's because there are better variations out there. Like lat pull-downs offer effectively all the benefits of a pull-up, but are more stable, less fatiguing, you can drop set them more easily, they're more accessible to more people. So yeah, A tier I think is right.
Your biceps and brachialis will take care of elbow flexion, and there's also going to be some muscle activation in your core since you aren't seated like in a lat pull-down. Now I went with a pull-up over a lat pull-down, mainly because I think they're harder, and I didn't want to shy away from the more challenging exercises this year. I'm also focusing a lot on progressive overload for this experiment, and I find that with lat pull-downs, once you get strong enough, it just becomes near impossible to avoid swinging back and forth. However, with pull-ups, you are more limited in how much you can swing and sway, especially once you get some weight strapped to you, and especially if you do a pause in the bottom of each rep. I'm not saying pull-ups are better than
CrossFitters have entered the chat. Look, I think a lot of people cheat on the lat pull-down, but I think a lot of people also cheat on pull-ups. Likewise, I'm not opposed to doing hard stuff for the sake of doing hard stuff, I guess. But when it comes to purely maximizing hypertrophy, I do think pull-downs are a better choice. That's not to say pull-ups are bad, I do pull-ups all the time, but yeah, I don't think pull-ups are S tier here.
Are better than pull-downs, they each have their strengths, but yes, I attribute most of my back growth this year to doing a lot of weighted pull-ups. 2 simple technique cues. Think about getting your chest to the bar rather than just getting your chin over the bar. This will help you stay in control of the movement better. And then, this may sound obvious, but as you pull, you want to think about pulling with your back rather than with your arms. Your arms are just connectors. So instead of pulling with your arms, think about driving your elbows down and in. This will activate your lats and prevent your biceps from taking over. I also use both
As a cue, I think focusing on getting your chest over the bar might lead to better mechanics compared to simply focusing on getting your chin over the bar. By the same token, I don't want any way to come away with the idea of this that you need to bring your chest to the bar, because you likely don't. The pull-up is already way more challenging at the very top than it is at the bottom. If anything, we likely want it to be more challenging at the bottom, in the stretch position, and less challenging at the top, in the shortened position. By forcing your chest to the bar, you're making it harder, sure, but you're probably also making it less productive. Just getting your chin over the bar is plenty for hypertrophy as a result. Additionally, when it comes to your biceps taking over, quote-unquote, I don't personally think that's a thing. As much as it makes for nice content to talk about, simply put, your biceps are responsible for elbow flexion. Your lats are responsible for shoulder adduction and extension. One cannot do the role of the other. By and large, if you have good external technique, meaning that you're properly performing the movement, the target muscles will be trained effectively. And cues that are designed to take one muscle out of the equation when another muscle couldn't actually replace its job to begin with, usually are just dressing, I guess. Are usually just fluff. They don't necessarily do anything. At least that's my opinion. And there's no research to suggest that what he's saying here would necessarily do anything.
There's both liquid chalk and straps on these, so my grip doesn't limit my back gains. And for the experiment, I used this grip in between a fully pronated wide grip and a neutral grip. I just find it a little more comfortable on my shoulders, but they all work. A very common...
Yep, the straps, the chalk, and the comfortable grip, I agree with all of that. As a rule of thumb, all deadlift variations or hip hinge variations, all rowing variations, all pull-ups or pull-downs, and all shrugs, you should nearly categorically be using lifting straps for. And honestly, I would use them as soon as you start lifting, because your grip will get stronger just by lifting consistently. But sooner or later, and usually it's quite soon into your lifting career, your grip will become the limiting factor in these movements. And when you're doing these compound movements, guess what? You're not trying to train your forearms. You're trying to train the much bigger muscle groups like the traps, the upper traps, the lower traps, the rhomboids, the lats, you get the idea. Even if your grip isn't currently giving out at the end of a set. simply having to focus on your grip is taking effort away from pushing the movement as a whole as hard as possible towards, okay, are my fingers sliding? Am I about to lose my grip? That's not what we want when we're performing compound movements. If you want to train your forearms, do forearm isolation work.
Very common mistake here is, oddly enough, when people worry too much about feeling their lats. Pull-ups aren't a feely exercise. They're not really supposed to feel amazing. They're supposed to get you jacked and strong. So pull yourself up and then lower yourself back down under control. Increase the weight you're pulling over time, and if you do that, your lats are going to grow, whether you feel them or not.
So when I started this experiment, I did 30 pounds for 6 reps on day 1. And now I just did 60 pounds for 6 reps. And that's just straight progressive overload. Pretty happy with that.
And yes, that was my last set, so taken to failure as always. If you can't do weighted pull-ups yet, no problem. Just start with assisted pull-ups. You can use a band or a machine and gradually reduce the assistance. Eccentric only pull-ups are also a great progression tool. Just use a box so you can start at the top of the range of motion and then lower yourself down slowly and repeat.
Real quick, if you have access to either a band or a machine for assistance, I would opt for the machine. For one, the machine doesn't unnecessarily reduce loading at the bottom in the stretch position, so that's preferable. And for another, if you position yourself slightly in front of the bar, as in further deeper into the machine, you can typically get a slightly deeper lat stretch than you can during even traditional pull-ups. And so it can be a nice variation if you want to take some load off and you also want to get a slightly deeper stretch compared to regular pull-ups.
My side delts also definitely improved throughout the course of this experiment, and I attribute most of that to this exercise right here, high cable lateral raises. Just 2 or 3 sets of 8 to 10 reps, but I pushed those sets hard. When done right, these almost exclusively target the side delts, which are arguably the most important muscle fibers for creating that wide, tapered X-frame look. And I use cables here because they provide consistent tension throughout the range of motion, unlike dumbbells where there's no tension at the bottom and peak tension only kicks in at the very top. Also, by setting the cable higher,
for what it's worth, the concept of constant tension or having tension in all portions of the movement probably isn't the be-all end-all. In fact, exercises like dumbbell flies or dumbbell pullovers, where the resistance is more biased towards the stretch position, are likely just as effective or more effective than exercises with a more constant tension profile, like cable flies. One other thing I want to point out real quick, so far the volume in this workout has been quite low. Yes, chest has gotten 5 sets, but even 5 sets really isn't that much. I'll give my recommendations on how to modify this workout for more growth at the end of this video.
The cable higher, you'll make the movement hardest when your delts are most stretched. Yeah, I do think the importance of the stretch was slightly exaggerated on social media for a while, but it's still true that with cables, peak tension always occurs when there's a 90-degree angle between your arm and the cable. And that happens early in the range of motion when the pulley is set high. Now,
real quick, I want to address this because I've seen a few people mention this now, where he caricatured the industry as being all about the stretch for years. 1, it wasn't really a wave of hype as much as it was actual research showing that training in more stretch position caused more growth. 2, that hasn't really changed. More research has come out since, which has broadly speaking shown the same thing. The same or more growth with a stretch. 3, it's been frustrating seeing some of these bigger influencers treating the stretch initially as a trend that they spoke about a lot, and now potentially, even though nothing's really materially changed about the research, stepping it back. In reality, our job as science communicators should really be to communicate the science. And as far as the consensus goes, that hasn't really changed. We are currently in the process of conducting meta-analysis on this topic, when it comes to the relationship of the stretch, tension in the stretch, length in partials, etc. for hypertrophy. So stay tuned on that. But I just wanted to briefly flag this since I've seen it crop up more and more.
A study published just this past December compared cable lateral raises to dumbbell lateral raises. The study we've all been waiting for, at least I was. Each subject trained one arm with cables and the other arm with dumbbells twice a week, 5 sets per session, all sets to failure. After 8 weeks of training, they found that both exercises grew the side delts about the same. So if you don't have access to cables, the good news is dumbbells still get the job done. That said, this study didn't have their subjects perform cable lateral raises quite the way I do them. They stopped their range of motion directly at their side, which I'd argue means they were missing out on one of the main potential benefits of using a cable, which is that extra range of motion you get by sweeping the weight across your body. Still, based on this new data, I doubt cables versus dumbbells is a true game changer. What matters most is choosing a variation where you can feel your side delts working and pushing that variation hard with good form. I still use both.
I was actually a co-author on the study and he did a great job explaining the results. I agree that finding a variation you can push hard is more important than anything. That being said, whether or not you need to feel the target muscles working, I'm not so sure about. Broadly speaking, the importance of the man-muscle connection is overblown on social media, and even in general gym lore. While you think there's dozens and heaps of studies on the topic finding more growth based on the way people talk about it, there's actually only been one study looking at muscle growth from focusing on the man-muscle connection versus an external performance-based cue, like get the weight up. And this study had relatively mixed results, potentially finding a small benefit in favor of the man-muscle connection. For the time being, there's just not enough research to say that you should be picking exercises based on what exercise feels best for a target muscle.
I still use both, cables on my upper body day and dumbbells on my push day. And of course, last set goes to failure. Now, by far, the most common lateral raise mistake is shrugging the weight up. This will cause your upper traps to take over and rob your side delts of tension. Instead, focus on sweeping the weight out rather than lifting it up. If you're struggling to get a feel for this, stand up against a wall and push your arm out sideways against the back of your forearm. Apply pressure gradually against the wall, and you should feel your side delts really turn on. That's the exact intention you should be using on your lateral raises. Think out.
Yep, this is a really smart technique because you can't shrug against resistance. All you can do is abduct the arm against resistance if you're doing against the wall. So as an exercise to get people to understand what joint function they're trying to achieve, perfect.
Out, not up. This next exercise will activate every single muscle fiber in your entire back from your neck down to your hips. It's the deficit Pendlay row, and if you're not doing it, I genuinely think you're missing out. You get amazing mid-trap engagement from the scapular retraction, high levels of upper and lower trap activation from scapular stabilization, solid lat activation from shoulder extension, and your spinal erectors will light up since they have to fire isometrically throughout the entire set to keep you locked in that horizontal position. By standing on a bumper plate, you'll increase the range of motion, giving your lats a deeper stretch at the bottom than a traditional floor-level Pendlay row. I also tweak the execution.
Overall, this is a solid exercise. It's worth noting that your spinal erectors likely aren't getting trained that hard. Jeff can likely RDL 3-4 plates for sets of 5 to 10. The challenge being presented to his spinal erectors in a set of rows with what looks like about 185 pounds, and where he's not even dynamically contracting the back, he's simply holding it statically at parallel, likely isn't great enough to get him close to failure for his spinal erectors. So yeah, this exercise is more of a shotgun approach to training your back. One way to potentially make this exercise a bit better for the whole back would be to perform it in a flexion row style, where you flex your spine on the way down and extend it on the way back up. By dynamically contracting the spinal extensors, you are likely increasing the challenge that they have to face, and as a result, getting them closer to failure. You're also exposing them to a deeper stretch, which should increase hypertrophy. But personally, just on an exercise-to-exercise comparison, I think this exercise, but performed flexion row style, and maybe done on a chest-supported machine row or a chest-supported T-bar row, would be an even better fit, especially this late into the workout, where you might be carrying some fatigue.
I also tweak the execution for hypertrophy. Instead of the typical explosive up, drop down style, I keep the explosive positive, but slow down the negative to maintain eccentric tension and control. Then on the last set, I push beyond failure by using lengthened partials. Yes, I still do these on some exercises. So when I can't get that full squeeze at the top, I still grind out another 3 or 4 reps in the stretch position where the lats are the strongest. I know some of you are sick of lengthened partials, but this is a spot where they really make sense, especially given the lat strength curve. Now, the biggest mistake here is just
lengthened partials mentioned. Big Jeff W. I've spoken about it at length, but lengthened partials do still make sense. Every comparison we have of lengthened partials to a full range of motion shows the same growth or more growth with lengthened partials, broadly speaking. So yeah, we can theory craft around what muscles benefit or what populations do or don't benefit, but at the end of the day, when you look at the most direct form of research, you see they're either as good or better than a full range of motion. End of story. And yeah, I'm passionate about this one, because hey, look at these goddamn certificates. This is what I did my stuff on. And no, I wasn't particularly biased, because when I went into it, I actually thought a full range of motion would be best, looking at the effects of range of motion on training adaptations, because I was working with Mike Israel at the time, and I was training exclusively with a full range of motion. So if anything, my bias going into it was, oh, a full range of motion is definitely going to be best. And this is more of a sort of confirmatory PhD project almost. But in reality, that's not what happened, and here we are.
Is just not getting fully horizontal. Being more upright isn't necessarily wrong, but when your torso is parallel to the floor, gravity is pulling directly against your scapular retractors. This forces your mid-traps and rhomboids to work much harder. The only way to make a traditional higher torso angle row hit the same is by compensating with more weight. but pound for pound, Pendlay rows are simply more challenging. So
this is true, and there's a couple of other benefits he hasn't mentioned. The closer to horizontal, and even beyond horizontal, you get your torso, the greater the stretch on the lats, because your shoulders become more flexed as a result of your torso angle. So I agree, you should get your back as close to horizontal as possible, while keeping a reasonably neutral spine.
So I didn't shy away from them this year.
Keep bent over rows bent over.
Also, make sure you use straps, or at the very least chalk. If you're letting grip hold you back here, you're definitely leaving back gains on the table. Last set to failure. For triceps, I'm using what current research shows is likely the single most effective movement, not just for the long head, but for all three heads, the cable overhead triceps extension. This study compared overhead extensions to pushdowns and found that overhead extensions caused 50% more growth in the long head, 40% more growth in the lateral and medial heads, and 40% more growth in the triceps overall. It's a killer. If I only have time for one triceps exercise, this is the one. Now, the most common mistake here actually happens before the set even starts, during the setup. Most people set the cable way too low, then waste a bunch of energy trying to spin and twist themselves into position. Instead, just move the cable up higher, squat underneath it, and use your legs to lift the weight up into place. Then take a step or two forward, and you're ready to go. No wasted energy. Failure. All right, biceps. This part's super cool because a few new studies on biceps growth just dropped. And wouldn't you know it, there's even one comparing my personal favorite, the Bayesian cable curl, to the classic preacher curl. The results? Well, there were non-significant trends favoring the Bayesian curl, but nothing statistically significant. That could be because the study was underpowered, it only had 15 subjects and it ran for just 10 weeks, or it could mean that both exercises grow your biceps equally well. Regardless, on my upper body day, I've been doing Bayesian curls, because based on the totality of the evidence, I still suspect they have a slight edge, especially thanks to that deadly combo of long muscle length and high tension in that lengthened position. Failure. But to be sure, on my pull day, where I train biceps again, I do preacher curls and hammer curls. Failure, failure.
I'm a bit confused by him mentioning failure as standalone words throughout the video, but I'm assuming he means failure. For what it's worth, the study he mentioned by Enquiries and colleagues did find a benefit in favor of Bayesian curls if you look at the numbers purely directionally. And like he mentions, it is likely that there is still a slight edge to Bayesian curls over a preacher curl or an incline curl. Or you can just combine incline curls and preacher curls into your routine and potentially get the same benefit. Since one exercise gets you a lot of tension at long muscle lengths, the preacher curl, and the other one gets you a deeper bicep stretch. So they kind of complement one another. Reviewing the workout as a whole, because I couldn't really speak to the volumes involved or even the rep ranges or the proximity to failure before seeing it all, I think the volume was on the low side. It looks like for chest and back specifically, he got around 5 fractional sets across the session. For the biceps and triceps, it was also around 5 sets, a bit more or a bit less. For the shoulders, it's harder to estimate, mostly on account of different contributions of compound movements directed towards side delt growth. But no matter, 5 fractional sets per muscle likely isn't optimal for growth. Even if he was doing an upper-lower split 6 days a week, which is kind of the maximum most people do, he would still, quote-unquote, only be getting 15 fractional weekly sets per muscle, which, based on the research by Pelham and colleagues, the largest study on training volume to date, isn't enough to maximize growth. Instead, you would likely want to be closer to 30 to 40 fractional weekly sets per muscle to maximize growth. And that's a lot of volume, and it takes a lot of time. So I understand it's not feasible or practical for everyone. At the same time, it is recoverable for many people. A lot of bodybuilders throughout history have used this high of a volume and benefited and built their best physiques ever. And even today, there are examples of people doing this. For example, Eric Helms is currently doing close to this volume for all muscles at once and recovering just fine. In general, people can recover and benefit from higher volumes than they think. And on a per session level, we also have evidence that 5 fractional sets isn't enough to maximize growth. A meta-analysis by Remmert and colleagues showed that more volume per session leads to more growth, all the way to 11 fractional sets per session per muscle, and potentially beyond. Beyond 11 sets, we didn't really have a clear indication of how much of a benefit there was. But at any rate, 5 sets per muscle group in that session falls well short of that 11 set figure. Now you could say, he is making up for this somewhat by training to failure on that last set. And you have a point. You can train closer to failure and get more stimulus from each set. However, the studies on training volume usually have participants train to failure as well. So if anything, since Jeff is keeping reps in reserve on several sets for each exercise, he should probably do a bit more volume. So if I had to modify this workout in a few ways, I would do the following. 1, I would perform more sets per exercise if time allows. 2, if time is an issue, potentially superset the chest and back movements and the biceps and tricep movement. 3, if time is an issue, try drop setting the cable ladder raise, since this can also save a ton of time without compromising hypertrophy. 4, if time is also an issue, or you simply want more stimulus, take most if not all sets to failure. Doing those lengthened partials after failure can help you get more stimulus without costing any more time. As far as exercise selection and rep ranges go, honestly, most of it was very solid. And likewise, the exercise order was on point as well. The two main issues I had with this upper body workout simply came down to volume and proximity to failure. I think more can be done on this workout and you'll grow more muscle. But what do you think? Do you think Jeff's workout was effective, or do you think it was lacking in some regards? And what did you think of my critiques? Were they fair or a bit over the top? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a comment, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in that next one. Peace.